SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
At the start of the month, Missouri became the 40th US state to launch legal sports betting, as 8 operators went live in the Show Me state. But how will this new market work? How did the process take place? And how will the rise of prediction markets impact sports betting? Welcome back to iGaming Daily, supported by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. I'm Charlie Horner, and today I'm joined by Sue Schneider, a consultant at SBC and co-founder of Defy the Odds, and Mark Ellinger, founding partner of Ellinger Bell Law Firm and a member of IMGL. Sue, Mark, thank you very much for joining me today. How are you both doing? Sue, we'll start with you.
Good to be here.
Excellent. And Mark?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Charlie. I sure appreciate it.
Excellent. Let's jump into this because it's always exciting when we get a new state to launch sports betting, and a state that both of you are very familiar with. So we'll start with you, Mark. It was a long journey to get to this point where sports betting is now legal and online in Missouri. Let's go back into this and have a bit of a history lesson. How did we get here? And where were the battle lines?
Well, it has been a long and some might say tortuous process to get here. This all started obviously after the Murphy decision from the United States Supreme Court that authorized states to implement sports betting. Normally, we would probably have implemented that by legislation. In other words, going through our General Assembly, passing a bill and having the governor sign it. In light of disputes over VLTs and other sundry issues in the state of Missouri, sports betting was hung up pretty much every session since the Murphy decision and has never gotten any traction in the General Assembly. As a result, about 2 years ago, a group of sports betting operators put together an initiative petition to literally amend the Constitution of the state of Missouri to provide for sports betting. That, after many steps along the way, went on the ballot last November, and over 2 million votes were cast, and it passed by about 3,000 votes. And the provisions of that constitutional amendment mandate sports betting and mandated that it go live at least by December 1st, which, of course, as you know, is the day it went live.
Yeah, and Sue, this is something that you must have been following closely over the last couple of years. What are your experiences of the battle to legalize sports betting in Missouri?
Well, it was frustrating, I'll put it that way. It's funny when I testified a couple times and told the story about I live on the Mississippi River, and guys at our marina would always boat over 8 months of the year, boat over to the other side of the river to get in the Illinois, within that from a geolocation standpoint. So it was very frustrating to have the delays. It was politics. It really was, a whole nother vertical in the industry here is the machines that are out in, just about every bar, gas station, everywhere else. And sports betting literally kind of got held hostage for that for a long time. And we had one state senator who became Secretary of State more recently, and then still held it up a bit. So it was a frustrating process.
Yeah, it was a long process and something I remember myself and Jessica Welman covering at length on SBC Americas at the time, which was, interesting that it was all tied to VLTs. But we're over those hurdles now, and the market is live, Mark. Could you just give us an overview of the rules and the regs? How does the Missouri sports betting market work? Who regulates it, and what regs do the operators need to abide by?
Sure. So the Missouri Gaming Commission is vested by the Constitution with the regulatory authority over sports betting. The constitutional amendment provides that they shall issue certain licenses, obviously going through license reviews, and they've promulgated pretty extensive set of regulations and then internal control standards that operators and suppliers have to go by. I guess the first standard is there's, aside from the physical sports book, which is also authorized in a number of casinos, particularly the larger ones have implemented physical sports book, there's kind of a two-tiered standard for the mobile operators. There are 2 statewide mobile operators that are authorized. There are also authorized mobile operators that can affiliate or partner with existing casinos. And it's based upon the holding companies. It's not based on the individual casinos. So there are 6 holding companies that have casinos in the state of Missouri, and each of them is allowed to contract with one sports wagering operator. And then there are what we call tethered licenses. Tethered licenses are connected to the sporting teams. There's a provision in the Constitution that allows for, I think, 6 sporting teams in the state of Missouri. It's based upon professional sports leagues to allow sports betting within their districts, which is a geographic area around the stadiums, and also to contract or be tethered to a sports betting operator. And there are some of those also. Some of those may overlap, but with respect to the casino holding companies, they cannot overlap. It can only be one individual. There are a lot of regulations. I think the thing to remember about Missouri is a pretty strict licensing state. So not just the operators, but suppliers and certain employees of sports betting operators and suppliers are going to have to go through a licensure process. It's a fairly significant licensure process. A lot of information is required. The commission, because of the tight time frames, has issued predominantly temporary licenses to everyone. That's so that they could go live. They are still undergoing the full review process where they do interviews, they look at financials, they interview individuals. So it's a pretty significant licensing scheme. And the long and the short of it is we've got it up and running, but there's still steps along the way. I think as implementation has occurred, and it's been relatively smooth, there have been a few issues that have come up in the course of implementation, and I would anticipate at some point in time there'll probably be some amendments to those regulations just to clean up some of those edge issues that appear to be causing a little bit of friction, not to the player so much, but I think with some of the operators.
Can I add something in and ask you a question, Mark? I know, for example, they have a ban on prop bets for colleges here in Missouri, I believe, and they have $5 million set aside for responsible gaming. How did things end up with the deduction for promotional? Because I know that's been an issue in a lot of other states. They're not getting the income because there's so much money going into the marketing side and bonuses and promotion. So how did that end up on this one?
So the constitutional amendment actually provides that the adjusted gross receipts, which is the basis under which the tax is actually applied, gets a full deduction from promotional credits.
Okay.
So, it will, I think everybody knows that the total cost or tax revenue will probably be less than is initially anticipated, particularly in the early stages in the rollout, because of the amount of promotional credits that are offered to attract folks to join those platforms and start the sports wagering. But they expressly wrote that into the Constitution, so that'll have to be applied. There's a little bit of a limit on it. There's a percentage limit that was built into it, so it's not 100%. It's 25% of all the total cash or cash equivalents. So it's capped, but it's a pretty robust tax deduction, I guess is probably the proper word, or that will result, I think, in the first probably year in revenues being less than anyone anticipated. After that, revenues you would assume would kind of start to bounce back as promotional credits become a little bit less about attracting people and a little bit more about in-game play.
And let's look at the specific operators who are in Missouri now. Sue, perhaps you could give us a bit of an overview of which operators are in the state and which ones are untethered, because it was also a bit of a surprise when we found out who the untethered operators were, right?
It was. Again, there were 3 applicants for that: FanDuel, DraftKings, and Circa. Circa beat out FanDuel, which I think was a little bit of a surprise. I happened to be out at Circa for Bet Bash the day that happened, and Derek Stevens was elated. And I know he kind of thought that was due to the fact that they really kind of cater to high rollers, and they were hoping their presentation would show that maybe they could bring some of those kind of bettors back in from offshore, which I thought was an interesting perspective on it. But so Circa at DraftKings got the untethered. The other ones include Fanatics, that's partnered up with Boyd Casinos. BetMGM is with Century Casinos. Caesars has two, one in Kansas City, one in St. Louis. Bet365 partnered with Cardinals, and FanDuel is partnered with St. Louis City Soccer. And then the other one that had pulled out kind of at the last minute was Underdog, which had partnered with the Royals. And I think the presumption is it's because they're going the prediction market route. So we'll see what happens with that. What I think is notable, and maybe Mark knows, there are a couple of Missouri casino companies that are not licensed at this point yet, and there is room for them, I guess, to do that in the future. Bally's probably being the most notable. I don't know if you've got any insight on those other ones and whether they plan to still apply in the future.
Well, Penn Sports Interactive was licensed.
Oh, right.
I think you might have missed that in your list there, Sue.
Yeah.
And that covered Hollywood and Argosy and Riverside casinos, which are three of the largest ones in the state. I think they used to operate, may still operate as ESPN Bet, but it's Penn Sports Interactive.
What's the score now?
One I haven't heard anything about is Affinity. I think that's the one operator we have to mention. So I don't know what Affinity is going to do or not going to do. They're a rural operator. They've got two small casinos in the north part of the state, and I haven't seen any, or at least haven't any indication as to what they're going to do.
But people have the leeway then, Bally's, some of these other ones, to come in yet and still apply, because we have 9 and room for 14.
Yeah, Sue, you're right. There was originally supposed to be 9 operators, but one of those, we now know, Underdog, has decided not to enter the market. We might talk about prediction markets a little bit later after the break, but that could be one possible reason why they decided to pull out. But Mark, I'm before we go to a break, I'm curious as to how the decision to award the untethered licenses are. Do you have any insight as to how that decision is made and why Circa might have beaten out FanDuel in that particular contest?
Well, I think there's a couple of points there. First of all, the Gaming Commission opened up a window and allowed operators that wanted the untethered to apply. There were FanDuel and DraftKings applied very quickly. At the very last minute, Circa applied. They went through the process, and my understanding is there were 2 factors really that kind of went into it, and they're related. Sue covered one of them, which is just the concept of bringing in larger players, larger dollar players into the market, and that Circa was catering more towards those. I think the other thing was there was a view that FanDuel and DraftKings were basically, although competitors, offering the exact same model and platform, and that they were looking for the smaller bettors. And the commission kind of opted for this method of, well, we'll let one in, and it could have been either one. It was an interesting gaming commission meeting because they put forward resolutions where they had different combinations. It could have been DraftKings and FanDuel. It could have been DraftKings and Circa, which was ultimately picked, or it could have been FanDuel and Circa. And the commission picked the DraftKings Circa option. Now, FanDuel is tethered, so they've got a mobile license. And from an outside perspective, in other words, from a consumer perspective, there's not a lot of difference between that. It's just that they have to have an agreement with, in their case, a sports team so that they can operate statewide.
Fantastic. Well, Sue, Mark, we'll take a short break and then we'll come back and we'll continue the discussion.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Welcome back to iGaming Daily. Today we're talking about the launch of Missouri's online sports betting market. Mark, do you think that the framework that's been landed upon, you mentioned before the break that there's a lot to it. It's a heavy set of regulations. Do you think it's operator friendly, or do you think there's potential for changes as the licensees kind of lobby in the future?
Well, some of this is in our Constitution, so changing it's going to be fairly difficult. It would require the voters to vote on it. So the general structure and form is going to stay no matter what. I think inside the regulations, it's not entirely operator friendly. I'd say it's, compared to, for example, casino gambling, which Missouri's had for a long time, it's probably slightly more favorable. But it's still a pretty significant process. Now, for most of these entities, once they get through the initial licensing side of it, the regulations really aren't all that bad. There's some concerns about some specific issues, ID verification. There's some concerns about things like that. The bigger issue probably is just going to be suppliers and making sure that the Gaming Commission can move at a quick pace as new products or new models come into the system. If a new licensee wants to come in, there's a process. If there's a new product, a change to the basic sports betting product, that's going to require a little bit more work. And you just want to make sure that the commission's able to adapt quickly to that.
And Sue, I guess because we're getting down to the last few states that are set to legalize and launch online sports betting, naturally, those regulations might be a little bit tighter, a little bit less operator friendly compared to some of those states that initially first came out of the blocks, maybe just before COVID. So how do you assess how sort of operator friendly these regulations are?
Well, I think, as Mark said, it's kind of a mixed bag. But from a tax standpoint, it's very attractive. And that was the other thing that Derek Stevens has said, that because he's in a low hold kind of model that he uses, he's only gone into like 6 states because there are only those many states that have really friendly tax regimes with it. So I think that's been a big factor. And hopefully, again, the regulators will be able to keep up with some of the demands, as Mark was talking about, as new products come in. I mean, that's a challenge for every regulator out there, is to be able to evaluate and turn some of those things around in a reasonable manner. And then, we'll have to see how things sort out with the prediction markets discussion. I don't know that there's been anything put out by the Missouri folks as to what will happen if, and Bet Fanatics has already launched a prediction market. So they're already, I think, going to have to make some decisions about how they're going to handle that kind of thing. But we'll see how that all turns out.
Yeah, we'll certainly come on to the prediction market side of the discussion very soon. But I just wanted to stick with you, Sue, on this one, because we mentioned it before the break. There were 14 licenses available, but not all of those 14 slots have been taken. We know that there were 9, there's now 8. And that's something that we've seen in other states as well. I think Massachusetts, for one, is a state where there were up to 15 licenses available. I think there's only 6 live operators now. So it's something that we're starting to see in several states. Why do you think it is that states aren't getting or aren't attracting as many operators as licenses that they are making available?
Well, I think it's more the competitive landscape. I mean, Colorado was another good example. They started out with lots of operators. I don't remember the number, but they started dropping off fairly quickly. You've seen it even in Canada and Ontario, where that number has dropped down. So I think it's more the competitive landscape more than anything else.
And Mark, is that something that you've noticed as well? And how would you assess that? Is it down to the competitive landscape in your view as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is the competitive landscape. Missouri has about 6.5 million people. We have some big sports franchises that are well known, particularly the Cardinals in St. Louis and the Chiefs in Kansas City. But it's a relatively small state. And as a result, I think there is competitive pressure. Whether all 8 stay, whether another 1 or 2 come in, or maybe a couple others leave, I think will really become dependent upon how they compete in the market. We're in the infant stages of it, needless to say. People are just signing up. It'll take a little bit of time for, I think, the market to sort out, see who the winners and losers are in the market. Obviously, bigger players, particularly FanDuel and DraftKings, simply have a bigger footprint and a better name ID than some of the other ones. But, you have a BetMGM that's got a large national marketing budget. It's very well known. ESPN Bet, which is the Penn product, has gotten to be fairly well known. So it does seem like there's possibly still some more market sorting to occur, but I think that'll occur probably here in the next year or two, as opposed to in the first few months. I mean, actually, Underdog pulling out was a bit of a surprise to a lot of people.
No, it certainly was. But I think one potential impact of Missouri opening that's quite interesting to follow as revenue reports start to come out in the next few months is perhaps the impact that Missouri could have on Illinois and Kansas as well, because obviously for listeners who might not be so aware, we've got St. Louis that borders Missouri and Illinois, and Kansas City, which is bordering on Missouri and Kansas. So I guess the question is how much will Missouri impact these two states and the tax revenue that those states make as well?
Yeah.
Perhaps Mark, you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, it'll have some impact on Illinois. Illinois' major population center is Chicago. It's the second largest city in the country. The Illinois side of St. Louis is probably, give or take, 1 million people, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. So it's probably not going to have as big of a market impact on Illinois. Kansas, on the other hand, is a much different story. Kansas has no professional sports programs. I guess they have men's soccer in Kansas, but the Chiefs and the Royals are the predominant sporting teams in the state of Kansas. The Kansas City metropolitan area is the largest population center in the state of Kansas. So it's, I think, going to have a significant impact. There's a lot of folks from Missouri, particularly during football weekends, we're seeing driving just across the state line, which in Kansas City is a road called State Line Road, and would literally just drive across the state line or sit on an exit ramp and place their bets because they were in Kansas, and then turn around and go home to watch the games or even go to the games. So it will have, a bigger impact on Kansas than I think it would on Illinois.
Mm-hmm. If I could add a couple numbers that I pulled off of GeoComply, they showed 250,000 accounts established right out of the chute. 188,000 of those were done in that pre-registration period from like November, 17th, 18th on. And, you have to look at Missouri is surrounded by 8 states, and all but one, Oklahoma, has legal sports betting. So even in the smaller areas. The other thing that they noted was in the first 6 weeks of the NFL season that there were 3,700 Kansas accounts who were actually based in Missouri and 2,800 Illinois accounts that were actually based in Missouri. So, there's some numbers there that I think you could extrapolate from there that, it's going to have that sort of effect.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that impacts the operations of those operators in Kansas, and maybe how some of the lawmakers might look to respond to that, because it could have some particularly significant impacts. But we have gone over 20 minutes now doing a US episode, and we've only fleetingly mentioned prediction markets, which I think is very good going for 2025. But let's talk about it now, because Fanatics Markets is live. We're led to believe that FanDuel and DraftKings, their prediction markets launch is going to be imminent. Sue, has the MGC said anything about prediction markets? And will going live with prediction markets have any impact on these operators having a license in Missouri?
Well, Mark is much closer to them than I am, but I've not seen anything publicly on it yet. I think every regulator, including the ones in Missouri, are going to just have to make some decisions. It's a big battle that is brewing, and I know state legislators are looking at it. I know regulators are looking at it, and they'll have to make decisions. And we'll force those decisions then onto the operators. Some have taken it on their own, like DraftKings and I believe FanDuel both in Nevada have said no, we're going to stay out of there. So then I think the next decision by the regulators is, what if somebody's going ahead and doing it? Does that impact their license there? So I don't know, Mark, have you gotten any intel on that you can share, how the Missouri's looking at it?
So I think Missouri is monitoring what's going on. There's litigation ongoing in the U.S. over the prediction markets. A consortium of states are involved in that. Missouri is actually, I think, one of the states that's involved in that litigation. That's going to have to sort out the debate between whether it's regulated by the federal government under the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, or whether it's gambling and it's regulated under the states, is pending in federal court in a couple of jurisdictions, and those cases are moving. The Nevada decision, I think, is a pretty significant decision, their policy pronouncement on that, because a lot of states in the U.S. will give a lot of credence to Nevada. I mean, it's the kind of mecca of gaming in the U.S. for a long time. They're known as a pretty good regulator. And as a result, I think there's going to be a lot of deference given to that. The concern, I think Sue raised it, is, if Nevada says it's gambling and you have to be regulated here, some people are not going to go into the Nevada market. But how will other states look at people who try to split the baby between the bathwater and do both? And I think that's going to be a problem. There's also always the possibility that legislation on a state level would get introduced on prediction markets, but I haven't seen a lot of indication that's going to occur in Missouri at this point.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's something that has been taking up a lot of regulators' time, operators' time, and perhaps even your time as well, Mark, this year. It's certainly been a topic of conversation that is being very dominant, and I would imagine is not going away anytime soon. But thank you ever so much, Mark, for taking the time to come and talk to us today, and to you as well, Sue. We really enjoyed having you both on the show. And thank you to our listeners for tuning into today's episode of iGaming Daily, and join us tomorrow to keep up to date with all the latest global gambling news.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.